Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm Vandana and I'm really excited to have you join us for our first ever episode of Geopolitics with Swasti with our consulting editor and foreign policy expert, Swasti Rao. And what a week to start. I mean, a lot has happened already. We've had Trump come back to power. We've seen some interesting people meeting at Davos. There's a lot going on in the neighborhood. So I think let's just dive right in. Since it's our first episode, we've taken questions from non-members, but this is from the next show, we'll be limiting our questions to members only. So if you want to ask something, there are many other benefits of being a member. We'll have more details down in our description box. But let's get to it. So our first question actually is from our member, Satya Pragyan Das, who has a two-part question. He asks, Swasti, why are incorrect terms like the Middle East so popular instead of the correct description like West Asia? And he also asks, even though the ceasefire is in progress, there's still a conflict. So how long, or do you think a two-state solution is possible between Israel and Palestine?
Well, yes, so that's a very good question. First of all, it's a loaded question. So this has two parts. One is why are terms like Middle East that Satya is referring to as incorrect still in usage, whereas West Asia, which is the correct usage, not used as much. Now, here we need to sort of just analyze that looking at Middle East and West Asia, it's not necessarily a correct and an incorrect way. I think a better way for you to understand is that there's a preferred way. So basically, the first part of it is, of course, it has a historical context that the British India Office papers, right? They refer to this region as Middle East, and of course, then the famous naval historian Alfred Mahan also refers to this region as Middle East, and then therefore you see that there's a preponderance of usage which often refers to this region as the Middle East. However, this also has a geographical connotation because middle with respect to what? And if you understand that reality is observer centric, so you can understand that perhaps the Westerners, when they are referring to this region, they're referring to it as the middle of
Right.
the Eastern cultures. Whereas West Asia is something which is more, more modern. It also makes more sense from India's perspective to call it West Asia because India would like to keep itself in the center of the world, and that becomes the vantage point. And from that vantage point, Vandana, when you look at that region that comprises the Middle East, actually it is west to us. So we call it West Asia. So these are some very basic ways of looking at it. Like I said, that yes, of course, Eurocentrism is there and we would like to challenge it. And a good example from it can be given. Another good example is South Asia, for example. And India, South Asia is also a colonial term. And so India has been trying to sort of challenge it by calling it either Southern Asia or the Indian subcontinent. Because we see that there is a China that calls the South China Sea a South China Sea and then the East China Sea, right? And everybody accepts it. And if people accept the Indian Ocean region, then why not the Indian subcontinent? So I guess these are terms, like I said, there's nothing very right or wrong here, but you have to understand it the way it has evolved and the way it suits certain cultural and colonial, post-colonial sensibilities and the vantage point, perhaps. That is the
Right.
best way to understand this.
So, like now, as we're heading into what India would like to believe is a much more multi-aligned, multipolar world, it makes sense to kind of, change the way that we see.
Well, it is about according agency. So India right now does not feel the need of really talking in the same semantics as were given by the colonial rulers or perhaps something which was extremely Eurocentric. And India finds it completely legit to say that this is our region and we develop the semantics to talk about it. So in many ways, I would say let's call it the Indian strategic or preferred strategic semantic.
Got
And I
it.
think that's a very valid way, but not necessarily technically a right or a wrong thing because, the US, the Westerners, they still call it the Middle East. Yeah.
So now let's jump into the second part of his question, which also takes us back to a very colonial, point of origin,
Yeah.
which is the two-state solution.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Well, that is the more complicated part, frankly. The two-state solution, in short, remained the official line of most states, including that of India's, by the way, whether it was the US, UK, the Western states, the European states, Israel itself. But all of that changed after the October 7 attacks. And two-state solution frankly just means that there is going to be a Palestinian state next to the Israeli state. But if you remember 1967, the territories in the region completely changed because the 1967 war between Arab states and Israel landed, in the situation where Israel took away territories like the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan
Yeah.
Heights, etc., etc., the West Bank,
Yeah.
etc. And what has happened over the years is that even though it has remained an official position, but because there are so many thousands and thousands of Israeli settlers living in those regions, that are now comprising of West Bank and Gaza, frankly, on the ground, it becomes very difficult to actually have a two-state solution, because what kind of a two states are you going to build? Because Israel is not going to give back the territory that it acquired in 1967. So in many ways, the two-state solution, I think, if you ask me, my opinion would be that it's become a kind of a convenient, tool to hide behind somewhere, because nobody really wants to bell the cat and ask Israel to give away the territory it has taken from all these other countries. In fact, if you remember, the current debacle in Syria also made Israel annex some further land, okay, around the Golan Heights. And Israel now says that it is going to give it back, but looking at the 1967 record, it doesn't seem probable. So, coming very quickly to your question, I think there are certain real, genuine, insurmountable problems, because what comprises the Palestinian state? I mean, how would you, the question of territory, that, like I just explained. The second question is about who is the real agency of the Palestinian state? Is it Hamas? Because if it is Hamas, then it's completely, you cannot reconcile Hamas's position on Israel and the two state, because Hamas says that we have to destroy the Israeli state. On the contrary, the Palestinian liberation, the PLA, they are, that are there in the West Bank, they have a different approach. But then again, I told you about the question of the 60,000, 600,000 settlers, etc. So on the paper, it remains an official position for many countries. However, please remember that in January, I think the second week of January, sometime 2024, which was a few months after the Hamas's attack was about 7th October 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu actually confirmed that Israel wants all of that land, and suddenly just debunked the
Two-state
the
solution,
two-state
yeah. Or
solution. And if you ask me now, I do not see it happening at all. That's the hard fact, because there are so many insurmountable problems, and now Israel has also given up the facade. And just to add more to it, Donald Trump has also somewhere alluded to the fact that there is no Palestine. So I think that's bad news as far as the two-state solution is concerned. As far as India is concerned, that's still India's official stand.
right, right. I mean, let's come back to the neighborhood, actually, which also similarly has several territorial kinds of conflicts that are going on, again, as a result of this complicated colonial historical process. But here we have a question from Vaibhav Mathur, who asks, why is the Indian government sitting idle regarding the new emerging nexus of Pakistan and Bangladesh? Why are we going too soft on the current Bangladeshi regime?
Well, so this is something which is extremely relevant. And Vandana, I must say this to Vaibhav, that Vaibhav, if you're really interested in understanding this issue, of course, I'm going to answer your question. But if you're really interested in unlayering it, the way it should be done, you should be watching the next episode of The Prince Worldview with Swasti, because I am actually getting a Bangladesh expert and a Pakistan expert to discuss exactly this problem, which is the strategic deepening between Pakistan and Bangladesh, and what should really India do. So without giving away the names of the experts right away, I think I would now come back to answering the question, which is that, well, look, this is something which is inevitable after Hasina's ouster. Now, from in the Indian strategic circles, if you remember, even though the Indian agencies, like our intelligence agencies, said that this is a Pakistan/China backed coup, but there was a lot of UN cry that it was an American, a CIA backed
Yeah.
coup, although even till now we don't really have any evidence for it. And now, as you see how the situation has been evolving, one can see very clearly that Pakistan and Bangladesh are now coming coming together in a way which is obviously going to be destabilizing to India, even though Bangladesh has been careful of not taking India's name.
Mhm.
In fact, I should tell you that this particular, there have been two high-profile visits. The
Mhm.
first visit was between, the Bangladeshi general and the Pakistani general, and the latest one has been, of the Pakistani ISI chief with the Bangladeshi general yet again, which actually talks about security and defense cooperation. And this is absolutely bad news for India. You know why? Not because Indian military capabilities are are not impressive, or India is not working on its military capabilities. The problem there is the China factor, because China today is the biggest arms supplier to both Pakistan and Bangladesh. That's one. The second thing which destabilizes India here is that they are not only backed by China, but also backed by Turkey.
Yeah.
Right. So India then is in this neighborhood where, before 1947, they were all one state.
Yeah.
But now you have these hostile states. And then, of course, this is not just a strategic problem, of course, the military problem, but also the question of refugees and, the
Yeah.
minorities that are coming into India. So it is a multi-layered problem for India. Now, very quickly, is India sitting on it or doing something about it? I have also done a worldview on this particular issue, on how the SARC has failed, etc. What should India be doing? But very quickly, what should India be doing? One is that everybody now sort of realizes that India's policy towards Bangladesh has been a failure. Whether, I think we should not mince our words and try to sort of look for excuses and pass the buck and call it,
Yeah.
their fault and all that, because we were prioritizing our strategic engagement with a particular regime and not a state.
Right.
And in fact, if you look carefully in Taliban, I mean, I'm just giving you a good example so that you can understand it better. If you look at how India for the longest time had a red line towards engaging Taliban, and that red line
Has
has then
changed
started
over
to
time,
blur
yeah.
over time, and now India has started to formalize.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that kind of a realization, which is rooted in strategic realism, that regimes will come and go, right? There would be pro-India regimes, anti-India regimes, but there would always be persistent anti-India factions in the neighborhood. When I say anti-India factions, I mean, for example, the BNPs in Bangladesh, the Khaleda Zia's party, the communists in Nepal, the communists in Sri Lanka. These anti-India factions will persist, and then they will always try to sort of have a very different approach and rhetoric about India's preeminence in the region when they are in power. So I think it is good for India when they have a pro-India government out there. But even if it is not a pro-India government out there, India should be developing frameworks to engage with the state and the stakeholders that are relevant in the region, and not preferred regimes. I think that is the biggest key takeaway that we are learning. What else can we do? Very quickly, India does not have the deep pockets that China has. There is no doubt about that. What India should be doing, of course, SARC doesn't work, so there's no point talking about SARC. BeamStec, of course, the Bay of Bengal initiative is
a good way to engage.
Is a good framework. But other than that, what India needs to double down on is perhaps, developing these trilateral frameworks or triangular cooperation frameworks with, for example, other friendly powers in the region. Like the EU has a lot of significant investment in Bangladesh. Japan, massive investment in Bangladesh. And if you carefully see the EU or Japan, they are, India has a very, very, I would say, healthy relationship with these partners, especially when it comes to developing, these kind of projects, developmental projects, etc. So I think India should be doubling down on that, and not merely trying and waiting for pro-India regimes to come back to start engagement. I think that has been the key takeaway, and we should be talking about it more freely. And the other part, you have to come back for the
I was just
for the
going
show.
to. I was just going to say you've raised some really interesting ideas for India, and so please come back and watch World 360. Moving away from the neighborhood, we actually have a question from Gaurav Gupta, who asks, "What do you think is the future of the I2U2 grouping under Trump's administration?" And then he follows up with another question, and he asks, whether Canada, Mexico, and Panama, countries like that, whether they're really in danger of some of the threats that Trump has sort of raised over the last few days.
Yeah, so I think, Gaurav, that's a very good question on I2U2, because mostly we are only talking about IMEC, which is
Yeah,
a
we
connectivity
don't really
corridor, and
hear.
people don't really talk as much about I2U2. Now, very quickly, just to give even others a context of what I2U2 is: a strategic quadrilateral. It's also sometimes referred to as West Asian Quad, and it is a grouping of 4 countries. The 2 I's stand for India and Israel, and the 2 U's stand for USA and UAE. And if you carefully see, from India's perspective, Israel, UAE, US are all extremely close strategic partners to India, right? And so it had a lot of, I would say, potential. It started with a bang. It was signed in 2021, but now it seems to be stuck. Then you have to understand why, because what is crucial therein, is this process of normalization of relations between the Middle Eastern countries, on which the strategic quadrilaterals such as the I2U2 and the connectivity corridor such as the IMEC were based. And this normalization was a great, I would say, one of the biggest feat of Trump 1.0 administration, because what happened was that, setting aside, I would say, decades and decades of very abnormal ties, a very, very overstretched Middle East, Trump was successful in trying to normalize relations between Israel, UAE, and Bahrain on the one hand, and Israel and Saudi Arabia on the other hand. Now, while the first part of the normalization was completed, and these accords are called the Abraham Accords, these are the world famous Abraham Accords, and the second one was still underway, and everybody was thinking that it's just a matter of time. Um, the first leg of normalization is done. The second leg of normalization would also be done. And it was not just that. Also within the grouping, within the Middle Eastern grouping, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc., had also started to normalize their ties with Qatar. Now, Qatar is a major player here because they had put embargoes on Qatar, because Qatar, they said that Qatar is too close to Iran. Qatar is, Hamas and all these guys, they live in Qatar, right? So all of that was happening, and everything was put on hold when the October 7 attack happened, because suddenly this was just thrown out of the window. So all these strategic ambitions that were coming out about how do you maximize on sort of connecting these diverse geographies through IMEC, or how do you sort of identify more developmental projects that these four countries were steering in 6 key areas, such as water, space, food security, so on and so forth. Everything was put on hold. You know why? Because one of the ways in which finance was supposed to be raised in these projects was by de-risking of it. And now, de-risking of finance, by definition, requires a stable strategic atmosphere. Because if there is so much instability, violence, who is going to come and invest money there? So as a result, I2U2 has not really been completely cancelled, or no country has walked away from it. But because of what has happened in that region, I think UAE and Israel would take a long time to sort of come back, to that normalcy. There are certain set of investments that were aimed for India. I think they are not completely derailed. They are still going on. But whatever was about more collaborative frameworks with respect to regions like Africa, etc., I don't think that we will have to wait. They are not going to come so easily.
Yeah. So the future of the I2U2 under Trump's administration basically depends on stability in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, Vandana, that to watch out for is that, when normalization was happening, in the first era of the Trump administration, nobody really thought that there would be something like an Hamas attack.
Like this.
Yeah, because it was just in everybody's interest to get into these frameworks. Okay. And now the problem is, and because the entire world is so, I would say, fluid and so uncertain, what happens is that even if peace were to return for a while, like right now there is a ceasefire, okay, but what is the guarantee that the peace that has been achieved is not fragile, but something which is sustainable? So those are the kind of considerations that are going to keep investors away from it. And I frankly, it's the same for IMEC as well, by the way. And that's the reason. I mean, IMEC is a wonderful, wonderful concept, and so is I2U2. Eventually, in the longer run, I do expect that to sort of rebound and take over. But I think in the short term, a lot of it actually depends on Benjamin Netanyahu's approach to Israel, whether the ceasefire is going to hold, etc., etc. And I think the progress made is going to be extremely incremental. Everybody's going to be very, very careful about that.
Right. I mean, on that note, like, is there an actual danger of war under the Trump administration with countries like Canada, Mexico, Panama?
Okay, now that's the other part of Trump's. And I have actually through my writings called it. Trump has been trolling everybody. Okay, now very quickly. Now, when you're talking about Panama, when you're talking about Canada, when you're talking about Mexico, let's understand Canada and Mexico separately and Panama separately. Now, very quickly, the problem with Canada and Mexico is that of course they are extremely close allies to the U.S. U.S. is also their biggest trading partners. In the case of Canada, that entire trade surplus that Canada has comes from the oil that Canada is selling to the US. Now, the natural question is why oil? Because US also produces so much oil. In fact, India is going to buy oil from the US
and going
now.
to produce even more by the sounds of it. Yeah.
So the answer to that is that there is a particular kind of a high density oil which Canada actually produces and sends to Midwest. And in fact, if you look at the imports inside US, the collective imports have fallen, but imports in the Midwest, almost 100% of those imports are coming from Canada.
Oh.
And that's been one of the reasons. Besides, not just that, the Canada, US, and Mexico also have a free trade agreement, and that free trade agreement is going to be up for renewal in 2026. And basically, Trump's idea is that you scare everybody, tell them that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and ultimately get a deal which is in American interest. So very quickly, a real possibility of war, not at all, but a damage to ties, yes. Yeah. And now Panama, and of course the question on Panama is also, I've done a lot of work on this as well. But very quickly, Panama, the question is that there's a Panama Canal, and in the Panama Canal is extremely crucial to America's economic security because 40% of American trade goes from there. Now, what Trump is saying is that we built the canal, so the Americans built the canal. In fact, if you remember, Vandana, I did a show where I got an Indian whose grandfather was a construction worker for the canal, right? And very interesting. But coming back, so what Trump is saying is that we are the ones who built it, and now the Chinese are taking a hold of two of these five ports, and he goes on to say that the Chinese are militarizing.
Yeah,
and
the Chinese are running. Yeah.
Now, very quickly, the Panama. Now there are two set of treaties between the U.S. and Panama, where the U.S. is allowed to use force if the neutrality of the canal is being compromised. But there is no legal basis for the US to attack the Panama Canal to take over that authority. You understand what I'm saying? So there is no legal provision whatsoever under which America could invade the Panama Canal
and invoke this.
or invoke this, because there is no legal instrument. So once again, it's faff, but yes, it works because, like I said, I think Trump's trump card is to keep his allies as well as his adversaries extremely unstable and on the edge, so that whenever he's able to cut that deal, he's able to get the best possible thing. It's a way of creating psychological pressure. So technically not much difference, but what America needs to watch out for is that it's not the way to treat your allies. So that dent to American reputation, I think, will cost Trump sometime.
Since we're talking about Trump, we have another question from Aditya, who asks, what is going to be the impact of the US leaving the Paris Agreement and the WHO? What kind of impact would that have on world politics? Do you think that organizations like the UN and the Security Council have any actual, real, tangible impact on world politics? And lastly, do you think under Trump whether America will actually exit NATO?
Okay, all right. Now, very quickly, now we have to understand Paris Agreement and WHO and US's withdrawal from there on the one hand, and US's threats of leaving the NATO on the other hand, because these are quite incommensurable in their ways. Although, of course, I mean, from your perspective, perhaps you're looking at the US lack of appetite for multilateral, institutions. So very quickly about the Paris, goal and WHO. Now, very quickly about Paris, agreement. Now, Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. It came into effect, couple of years later or next year. Now, it is signed, it is joined by 200 countries. Only 3 countries in the world have left it: US, Iran, and I guess Yemen. Those kind of countries, maybe Libya as well. But US is the most prominent country. Now, very quickly, what has happened? Now, when this was signed, right, and when Obama joined it using an executive order. It was not ratified by the Congress. So it was not a congressional, decision. And as a result, because it was it was done using executive orders, and executive orders have been made so fashionable by Donald Trump,
By
because
Trump.
that's what he started doing
Yeah, I
when
think
he
he
came.
signed
One
over
after the other, he
I think he
started
did like
signing.
200 in his first administration, and now
Those are low hanging fruits, and
yeah.
that's what I'm trying to make the viewers understand here. So, because Obama used an executive order to join it, and it was not really ratified by the Congress, when Trump came, and Trump was completely critical of it, and Trump's idea is very simple. He's saying that, listen, I don't care about the world. First of all, this climate thing is a hoax. Secondly, he says that the kind of demands that it is putting on us is coming at the interest of common Americans, because it is basically robbing them of their jobs and all that. And then all the money that we commit, to these agreements is not really worth it, because it's countries like China and India, he says that are actually not meeting those requirements, because they are saying that it's common but differentiated responsibility, etc. We are late bloomers, so you have to allow us to keep using
Pollute,
fossil fuels and all that, which is really not the case, because Paris Agreement is not the only yardstick. India has been very good with SDGs, etc. But coming back to Trump, so Trump's argument is that America should withdraw from these institutions, these frameworks, because it doesn't help the American people. In fact, it is going to really cut their jobs.
He thinks America is giving more than it gets.
Yeah, America is giving more than it gets, and it's of no use, because ultimately what you're doing is that you're actually being held ransom by developing countries that want to eat the cake and have it too, and at our expense. That's Trump's rhetoric. And because it was done by an executive order, when Donald Trump came, he actually left it very quickly. And then when Biden came, he joined it again.
Yeah.
And it was so when Biden joined it, it was again by an executive order. It was not yet ratified by the Congress. And therefore, when Trump came, he, in a snap, he pulled back. So there's been this volley of executive orders, the counter executive orders, the counter executive orders. It's quite funny, but but frankly,
it's like a pendulum.
and it's been a kind of a low hanging fruit, and you know why? Because this is something with which you show immediate result. And similarly has been the case of WHO. Trump has been saying that, look at the mismanagement of COVID, look at the money we give to WHO, look at the way China tried to control the narrative. The head of WHO was pretty much a Chinese stooge, according to him. And he says that, why do we need to look at the amount of, or the number of American lives which were lost during COVID? Why do we need to be into all this? And since the WHO joining had also happened because of an executive order, it was very easy for Trump to revoke it. And again, the same thing had happened, that Trump left it, Biden came and rejoined it, but it was again only an executive order. So Trump came and kind of, reversed the executive order, and now he's out.
NATO is different from this, however. Tell me why.
Yeah, exactly. So I just told you how easy it was for Trump to actually withdraw from these, organizations such as the Paris Agreement as well as WHO. But NATO is a completely different ballgame, because NATO has not been joined by the US using only an executive order. NATO is pretty much a law. It has all kind of congressional approval. And frankly, even though there are certain interpretations that say that, yes, willy-nilly, one could really try and make a case for America to step out of it if the, 2/3 majority from the Congress, etc., etc. But what has happened, Vandana, is that in 2023, because Trump's rhetoric of pulling out from NATO was so high, okay, that Trump actually made it impossible for the US to leave the NATO by a 2023 law, and he made it more complicated, where he basically said that the president of the United States cannot leave unilaterally unless there are these number of,
which is Biden did this.
Which was Biden in 2023. So there has to be consent of Senate, advice from the Senate, 2/3 of senators should vote for it, etc.
And this is at the height of the Ukraine war.
And this is height of the Ukraine war. So I guess but that's just the one part. But what I think what you really need to understand is that it is not Trump's intention to leave NATO either. I would urge you to read my column which came out, on Friday. And in that column, I've actually argued that alliances such as NATO are indispensable for America to maintain its strategic posture in the world, not only because it gives America allies, but if you look at America's theory of forward defense, again, please please understand that it's not about American borders. It is about the oceanic frontiers. And it is only through alliances such as the NATO in Europe or other alliances, the security alliances, which are also permanent nature with countries like South Korea or Japan, that US is able to maintain bases which actually protect its forward posturing oceanic frontiers. And that is indispensable for American interests. So while rhetoric has been on the one hand, but the reality is a little different. And my reading is that Trump's insistence on threatening to get away from NATO has been the Trump pill, which was required for Europeans to be woken up from their slumber of, what
What's
Alexander
happening?
Stubb
Yeah.
has called their holiday from history is
Yeah.
over. So you get up and please start spending, because there is no denying the fact that the Europeans had gotten into this very comfortable, cozy post Second World War arrangement where America was basically heavy lifting all their security, and they were not even committing 2% of their GDPs. And it's only because Trump has been so consistent in putting up this threat in a very existential manner, of course, in the wake of the Ukraine war, is where now you see the European countries one after the other saying that yes, we will commit more, and Poland and other countries, there are more frontline states, have actually are very close to committing 5%. So I think Trump has been very successful in trying to wake Europe up. Now, it's a different thing whether there would be certain countries like Germany who are very, very averse to doing it and they're very lazy. Now, of course, the 27 member states are not going to act
The same
the
way.
same way.
Yeah.
But despite that, please understand that Trump's rhetoric on NATO, right, has to be understood in this
Right.
context. You cannot put NATO, WHO, Paris
In the
Agreement
same
in the
breath.
same
Yeah.
light, because, like I said, of this entire theory of America has to protect its oceanic frontiers, which is very, very crucial. America doesn't have any sovereign territory, and perhaps that's another reason why America has been wanting to double down on Greenland.
Yeah.
By the
Yeah.
way, it doesn't make sense, right? On the
Yeah.
one hand, you want to withdraw, and
Yeah.
on the other hand, you're trying to start a war in Greenland. So basically, it shows that America is very serious about maintaining a forward posture in its oceanic frontiers. So keep that
Right.
in mind.
Yeah, I think the Greenland situation is also quite fascinating. Maybe we can talk more about it next
Please ask
week.
a question.
Yeah, ask us questions. We have one last question for today from Vasudev Krishnakumar. Is peace in the Taiwan Strait only possible if Taiwan acquires nuclear weapon capability?
Now, that again is a very good question, because what the Ukraine war has taught most of the countries that are worried for their territorial integrity is that काश उनके पास nuclear weapon होता, right? I mean, this has been the key takeaway. And I think when you ask this question, I know where you're coming from. That's one way. That's a short answer. Yes, if Taiwan had nuclear weapons, then it wouldn't be running the risk of getting invaded by China the way it is,
Yeah.
the way it's happening. There is also a second answer. It also depends on how you define peace, frankly, Vandana, because there could be a situation when the Taiwanese people, Taiwan is a vibrant democracy, by the way,
Yeah.
So, and I mean, one of my most favorite cities in the world is Taipei. It's absolutely remarkable, lovely. But there could be a situation when the Taiwanese people actually elect a government with a mandate to join the mainland. So it depends, that it remains a very, very remote possibility, but you cannot really overrule it
Outrule,
completely,
yeah.
because there could come a situation. So that's the second way of whether there can be lasting peace. But if you look at the details of it, Taiwan is a member of the NPT. It's a signatory of NPT. And since at least 1988, Taiwan has made sure that it doesn't want any nuclear weapons. What has been happening in Taiwan is that because every time China has this, and by the way, 1988, the rhetoric of taking Taiwan by force wasn't really that strong. So this rhetoric became so centerpiece, only when Xi Jinping came to power. So before Xi Jinping coming to power, China was a different China. So after Xi Jinping coming to power, after the vast and I would say various advancements of military modernization,
And
especially
consolidation,
in People's Liberation Army, Navy, and all this, violation of Taiwanese airspace and all the problems in the South China Sea. So
Yeah.
basically, all the unilateral attempts at changing the status quo, this revisionism, this irredentism that China has shown. By the way, it's the same that Russia has shown in Ukraine. Okay, that perhaps Iran has been trying to show, and so it's like, we could just take this example and put it so many places. But coming back to Taiwan, after Xi Jinping, yes, there has been a debate in Taiwan that says that, okay, let's have the technology, even if we do not really want to develop a weapon. But because Taiwan is a signatory to NPT, and Taiwan is also extremely serious about wanting the US to come and support it, so Taiwan is very serious about the IAEA safeguards. And in fact, one of the safeguards is called the Program 93+2, and Taiwan has, put it. So I don't see any possibility of Taiwan acquiring nuclear weapons. Taiwan is not an Iran. Taiwan is not a North Korea. And the way they have gone about trying to protect themselves is actually what is known as their chip shield, which is that they think that their dominance in the chip industry, which is the backbone of every single advanced weaponry, telephones, electronics, everything that we can lay your finger on, and TSMC is basically the main player there. So as long as you're dominating that part of the chip industry, you have an automatic protection, because America will be bound to come and protect you, because so much of American industries
depends on Taiwanese wares.
But you know what the Biden then did? The Biden has tried to shift the supply chains and the production chains of these semiconductors away from Taiwan. And Biden has been trying to, take it to different parts of the world, and I mean that's another conversation for another day. But what I want to say is that has actually made Taiwan very unstable, and then Taiwan was very quick to actually then start, because if you look at the Biden, Chip Act of 2022, perhaps, or 23. Then they said that, okay, we want to now build resilience. There is again, what we have learned from COVID is that too much of over dependence on one source is going
messes up the supply chain.
Mess the supply chain up, will always render you vulnerable. So we have to also bring it back home, and we have to friendshore it to more say trustworthy countries here and there. And Taiwanese were the first ones to actually do the big investment in the US.
Right.
Okay, because they still wanted to do it. So I think Taiwan is trying all these ways to
diversify,
to basically assert its own importance for the Western world, so that in case of an attack, the Western world, especially led by the US, is has to come and protect it. But then the Western world's policies towards Taiwan is known as strategic ambiguity. So we know that in case of an armed attack, there will be a response. There will definitely be a response, because if you look at the that island chain, that is there, any attack on Taiwan from the Chinese side will automatically involve the Japanese island of Senkaku, which China also claims and calls it, some other name, but Japanese call it Senkaku. And because of that, Japan will be pulled into the war. If Japan is pulled into the war, the US is going to be pulled into the war. But these are all conjectures and speculation. Ultimately, one doesn't know what would be the real, measures taken by the US militarily. For the rest of the world, it would be disruption to supply chain. So it's a very, very bad scenario to imagine. But that's a very complicated answer to your simple question. But it was a very complicated question, if you get that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. So thank you for joining us, Swasti. And please join us again next week for the second episode of the show.
Thank you so much, Vandana. And all I have to say to the viewers is that this time we were very lenient, and we took questions from Twitter, and we took questions from everywhere. And in fact, for those who are having difficulty in understanding either English or my accent, we are going to be doing a Hindi version, which is called Swasti Se Sawal. So आप हिंदी में भी अपना सवाल पूछ सकते हैं. Hope that helps.